When we join the military, we give a great deal of control over our daily lives. But there are some things that no one should have to endure, some sacrifices that no one should have to make. Stay with us as we discuss military sexual trauma. Thanks for tuning in to Veterans Voices. I'm your host, Joshua Zebley, along with my co-host, Aletta Kim. Tonight we'll be talking about military sexual trauma. If you want to be part of the conversation, call us at 925-313-1170. Send us a message through Facebook at Veteran Voices 1 or email us at veteranvoices@contracostatv.org. Or you can just click the URL on the screen to enter the Zoom webinar. I want to introduce tonight's guest, psychologist Dr. Tara Neavins and Dr. Rosemary Donalson, who's also an Air Force veteran, and Coast Guard veteran Danette Montoya. Welcome.
We'll be talking very openly about sexual trauma tonight, and we realize that it may be triggering for some of our viewers. We'll be displaying the numbers for the National Sexual Assault Hotline and the Veterans Crisis Line throughout the show. Please call if you're having difficult feelings. We wanted to start the show by talking about the kinds of experiences that men and women are having in the military as we speak. I recently did an interview with a woman who's currently serving in the Army. Will be concealing her identity for that reason. Thank you so much for being here with us today and agreeing to join us in Veterans Voices. I want to ask you, what inspired you to join the military in the first place?
So what inspired me to join the military since I was a younger girl, I was looking at my father's yearbook. He was in the United States Marines. And my mother's father, which is my grandfather, used to be in the Philippine Army. And my mom said she's always wanted to join the military, but instead she became a nurse. And when I saw my dad's pictures, I'm like, I'm going to be like Daddy. Just a little girl, want to be G.I. Jane. Just want to, be tough. I wanted to be like Xena, the warrior princess in my own way. And I always thought it was cool just to play with the weapon systems, fight the bad guys, be a hero, inspire other people to become a hero as well too.
I want to ask, did you maybe from conversations with your father or anyone else, did you know or hear about the potential for sexual assault, or had you heard of the term military sexual trauma before you joined? And if you did what did you think about, or how did you feel about
this? I have from my father, he was showing me documentaries. I think it's called something with war, sex or something like that. And showed me different women who served who cried because of their sexual trauma. And I didn't think of anything about it, but I'm just like, Dad, I think I'll be all right. It's really unfortunate that my sisters in arms, even though I'm not joined yet, I swear in, have gone through this, and I pray for their healing, but I'll be all right, Dad. Promise.
Can you talk a little bit in general about your story? Sort of when did you first start to experience personally indication of military sexual assault? What happened? You don't have to give too much detail, whatever you're comfortable with sharing from a personal experience with this.
When I was working, I thought this one NCO was a good friend of mine, but unfortunately, he was not a friend. After I found out, he not only gossiped about me, I confronted him. And about a rumor stating that me and another non-commissioned officer, which is a battle buddy, a peer of mine, he told a lot of people like, oh, those two are having sexual intercourse. And I asked him to not, spread those rumors. Then he came back, retaliated against me, and just yelled at me. Now, afterwards, I don't talk to him. Afterwards, he once came into my office, decided he could just go ahead and, according to the military, when you're groping somebody, it's sexual assault. And I was just shocked when that happened because not only I thought he was a friend of mine, but he did anything to upset me. And at that point, that not only upset me, but that traumatized me. This man would find anything to break me down.
So it sounds like there was a person who you were working with who started to spread rumors of sexual nature about you. And when you confronted him, he not only further slandered you, but he confronted you and he groped you. Is that what you experienced?
I did, and unfortunately, it happened during a time that I was pregnant too. And it happened during a time that one of my child was diagnosed with autism. I This event really not just traumatized me, but my whole family.
So we apologize for some of the audio difficulties of that clip, but I want to turn to our guests and we really want to get this right. This topic is so important. Let's start at the beginning, team. Can you help us define what kinds of behaviors are we talking about when we say the term military sexual trauma?
Yeah, it's any kind of behavior of a sexual nature, either attempted or completed. It's self-defined, so based on what the veteran is saying, happened to them. And it really falls on a continuum between manipulation, coercion, and force. So there are lots of different forms this can take.
Thank you, Dr. Neavins. To our other guests, do you care to, does that definition sort of make sense to you? Are we being too broad or should we get more specific with it?
Well, it seems like there's unfortunately many people who are experiencing sexual trauma in the military, and sometimes people might not realize that it's happening. And so having a specific definition would be really helpful to recognize what it is. It might start off as inappropriate comments or in the guise of joking or teasing. So just kind of realizing for people that that's kind of the beginning of the continuum, and then it can lead all the way to inappropriate touching and groping, and then sexual assault, rape. Yeah.
That's such a good point, yeah.
And related to what you're saying too, there's often this grooming pattern. So it can start off very small. It's just a comment here and there, and you brush it off, and maybe I'm being too sensitive. And then it escalates once the person who's potentially hurting you feels that they have that ability to do so.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, Dr. Neavins. I mean, being a Army veteran myself, when you're brand new to the military, you're seeking to fit in. So, if there is an inappropriate comment or an inappropriate experience, you might be questioning yourself at first and wondering, am I taking this a little too seriously? You're trying to fit in with that culture, and you're trying to, as our survivor mentioned in the video, you're trying to fit in and do a good job, right? That's something that we hear a lot from our veterans is they're very idealistic. They joined the military because they wanted to help other people.
So thank you all for joining us. You guys made me think, is there any numbers, any percentages that we think that has actually come forward? And I know it's low, that's just general knowledge, but why do you think so many stay so silent?
Yeah, so in terms of the VA statistics, so a national study was done. It's about 1 in 3 women report that they've experienced MST, and about 1 in 50 male veterans report MST. And I think the reporting is so low for many reasons. One is that people are not believed many times. And so why would you say something if you're not going to be believed? Mm-hmm. And there are often repercussions. The person who was a survivor may be moved, and the person who perpetrated the violence may stay in the unit.
Yeah. from the Independent Review Commission that I think will be brought up later this evening. The stats are since 2010 to 2021, 65,000 women reported military sexual assault, and 69,000 men reported sexual assault. And I think what surprises me is there's actually more men that have reported sexual assault just by the numbers. So it's important to consider that men are also survivors of sexual assault in the military.
Yeah, and related to that, the military is about 20% female, so that helps understand those overall numbers. I know in my practice, every week I see a man who has experienced MST, and I see many women. So this is definitely a very common, unfortunate experience.
I think a lot of people don't want to come forward because of the shame and the feeling like it might be their fault in some ways, and also in the military, fear of maybe losing their career. If they come forward, they might, have to face going to court and that whole process, and maybe just feeling like staying silent would allow them to keep their career.
I think another thing unique to the military, I'm not a veteran, so the veterans could speak to this more, but when this happens, it's like incest, because these are your brothers, your sisters. Women perpetrate violence, sexual violence, as well as men. And it's pretty hard to confront one of those, someone who's like your family member. 80% of the time, we know the person that has sexually assaulted us. And so it's definitely not just a stranger in a dark alley that you don't know. That's a very small number of sexual assaults.
Yeah, I think oftentimes the sexual assault survivors are junior enlisted, new people to the military, people who are alone, the only woman in their command group, and they, feel maybe isolated and. So that I think it puts people at risk. The power dynamic of someone who's junior with maybe a person in higher rank above them puts people at risk additionally for military sexual assault.
Yeah, and as we've been, go ahead, Danette.
I was just going to say, and then also sometimes when people do come forward about experiencing MST, they don't have the support, not just within the command, but they also don't have the support when it comes to also other women, because people don't want to attach themselves to the troublemaker, someone who's going to bring the command down and stuff. And these are things that I have heard, in my roles with the VA and as a veteran.
Is there more reporting on the female side or the male side, or do you think that men are less likely to report or female, or is it kind of, there's no real data on that? I'm just curious, what percentage-wise?
I think men tend to be less likely to report it for many reasons. So as I said in my practice, I see a lot of Marines, for example, and they've never told anyone else but me. And I always feel very privileged when they do that. They're supposed to be you can argue which branch is toughest, but they tend to argue that they're the toughest. And then to have this happen, they often think that they're gay now. But in fact, 90% of men who rape other men are straight. It has nothing to do with sexual orientation. It has nothing to do with gender identity. It's about power and control. And just a quick example about that. So if someone's convicted of drunk driving, it's not that they have a problem with driving. They have a problem with drinking. Same thing with sexual assault. It's not that they have a problem with sex or arousal. They have a problem with violence, and they've chosen to use sexual things to commit that violence.
Yeah, that's a really good way of thinking of it, Dr. Neavins. Danette, I want to go back to what you said. You're a Coast Guard veteran, but you also work with veterans, folks who are out of uniform, in both a group and individual setting, and providing counseling and therapy to talk about military sexual trauma. And you said that, maybe folks are not coming forward while they're in the military. Even other women, might treat them differently or not want to be associated with someone who reports something like that. What do you think changes once we take off our uniform? Because There are groups that the VA offers for women veterans where, I've been to some of these groups where women are much more able to or willing to come forward and have those conversations outside of uniform. And in my personal experience, I've seen some really tremendous bonds grow out of those groups. So what do you think the difference is from when we're in the military, we've got that uniform on, we don't want to talk about it, to fast forwarding to a VA group, you're now more willing to speak about it?
Yeah, thank you. I know personally for me, when I first, when I was in the service and I experienced MST, when I got out, one of the things that I wanted nothing to do with the government, I wanted nothing to do with the VA or anything. So I didn't even admit I was a veteran for the first 10 years when I got out. What I am finding now, when people do come forward, they don't necessarily know that resources are there for them. And then also, I think this whole identifying as a victim, identifying as a survivor, a lot of us just can't wrap our heads around how we view ourselves when it comes to experiencing MST or these other sorts of violence that we're probably going to be talking about. But I find that in the groups too, people aren't always really comfortable coming forward, but they have found that that they realize throughout their life they've made decisions based on their MST experience. It has really been a challenging life to live, and so now they're coming forward and they're wanting the help and the services, whether it's individual or group. To have male groups are a little more challenging also, and also co-ed groups. We've had some of those too, but those don't seem to do so well because of not feeling the safety in those groups also.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, Josh.
So I'm thinking about the civilian side and the military side. MST is higher on the military side, correct? But it's reported less. So, I mean, just thinking of that in our heads, that's a huge problem. Why do you all think that in the military it outnumbers the civilian? It's not MST; it would just be sexual trauma or sexual assault. Is that because it's a group of young people together that are in different situations? I'm trying to figure that out. Maybe one of you can help with that.
I think that's a really good question. And what I appreciate about the independent review commission that the military did on sexual assault and harassment is they don't know the answer necessarily. And so they're putting funding into research to look into why are people perpetrating sexual assault in the military specifically, maybe at a higher rate. I mean, there's some things that we could imagine is the case. Long work hours with, limited contact with family and few female military members that maybe are at risk of being victimized. But I think what's really going to be helpful is getting the data on why this happens.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think the military is like any closed system. If you look at the prison population, you look at Hollywood, you look at religious entities. The Catholic Church has received a lot of negative feedback and horrible feedback with regard to all the cases. But you have a structure of power and control, and you have a clear top and a bottom. That's fodder for having a greater number of sexual violence cases because it's not taken as seriously. There's already this power structure in college. It's often the first year student and then the senior is the one perpetrating them. There are meat sheets that people pass along. So I don't think the military is that different than other closed systems, but traditionally there hasn't been a lot of criminal prosecution, which allows people to hang out and continue to assault folks.
Dr. Neavins, I want to shift back to why folks wait to come forward, what that experience is like. People do wait 10, 20, 30 years sometimes to talk about this. Do you think maybe the reason is that they're not sure what the true definition of military sexual assault is and military sexual trauma?
There was a book written in 1985, I'm forgetting the author, but it was called I Never Called It Rape. And I think that still exists because it's like, oh, it was not exactly consensual, but I'm not exactly sure what happened. And I thought I wanted something, but then I went a little farther than I realized. So that's a very common experience. So kind of laying out the definition, talking with people, as people have talked about groups, sharing experiences can be very helpful.
That makes sense. Well, the most obvious forms of military sexual trauma involve unwanted physical contact, as we've talked about. But our service members are also facing things like sexual coercion and retaliation. Let's take a look at a little bit more of my interview with active duty military sexual trauma survivor.
Last year, I've gone through sexual harassment again with a senior leader. After he didn't get what he wanted from me, he decided to retaliate against me and this other lieutenant. And for some reason, everybody started saying that me and this lieutenant were having sexual intercourse when that wasn't true. That was just a way to get back at me, put me on extra duty. I was like, if I'm here to encourage people to come forward, let me practice what I preach to the subordinate ranks. Mm-hmm. I reported him, and I had an angry sergeant major coming at me, say, why didn't you talk to me? Why you got to do all that? I'm like, I'm done. He retaliated against me when he didn't get what he wants, and he's retaliating against me even more because I reported, and now you're retaliating against me. You know what? I can suffer from the repercussion, but just to let you know that there is somebody above you, Sergeant Major, with all due respect, as I stand at the position of parade rest in front of him, in front of her respectfully, that there's always a congresswoman, a congressman, and inspector general, or someone above her that could go and let them know that she's retaliating against me. And then she decided to fire me from position. This whole, they need to redefine what retaliation is, because apparently none of this is retaliation. They definitely need to respect Joe Biden's wishes on sexual harassment is going to be a crime now. You could go to Fort Leavenworth for that, which is a military jail system. And a lot of people are finding sneaky and snarky ways to go ahead and still retaliate against someone that reports sexual harassment and assault and sexual harassment and assault.
We were talking about military sexual trauma. Want to be part of the conversation? Call us at 925-313-1170. Send us a message through Facebook at Veterans Voices 1 or email us at veteransvoices@contracostatv.org. You can also just click the URL below to enter the Zoom webinar. We know that tonight's conversation may be triggering for some viewers. We'll be showing the number for the National Sexual Assault Hotline during the show.
So I want to bring it back to our guests again. We're talking again about military sexual trauma, and when we say that term, I think folks often think about sexual assault specifically. But as our other guests brought up, you know, there's many more ways that those who are serving in the military today are being violated, experiencing military sexual trauma. Can we talk a little bit about the nuances of this term and other types of things that our service members are experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, it starts as jokes, as just touching someone's shoulder, giving them a back rub. It's a lack of consent. So it's not being clear and asking the person what they would like to do or not to do. It's someone just starting something without ever having a conversation. You know, we don't do that with anything else. If I want to buy a house, I have forms that I have to sign and everything else. But sexual assault starts with just not asking. Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, she brought it up in the video. We're talking about things like retaliation. You know, when she's even mentioning that there's a conversation going on between this service member and their sergeant major, where they're confronting the sergeant major about retaliation, and then they're retaliated against. A whole other layer of that comes on top of it. So when we talk about military sexual trauma, are we talking about also retaliation? Are we talking about coercion? Danette, would you like to speak on that in terms of your experiences either in the Coast Guard or with talking with veterans who've shared their experiences with you?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you please repeat that? I'm sorry, like some stuff.
So we're talking about, besides the very direct form of sexual assault and unwanted physical contact, what else falls under the definition of military sexual trauma? One of the things that was brought up already was retaliation.
Right. So retaliation also, when it comes to the not getting promoted, getting worse jobs to do, being transferred. And I know, like in my situation, they transferred me. They called it for my safety, but they were actually wanting to get me like a really bad duty station because I had reported it. Nothing happened to the perpetrator. In fact, the perpetrator also had threatened my life, but the command took control of it. I got in trouble, and then through that, they transferred me down south, which was actually turned out to be a wonderful thing in the end. But when someone threatens your life, another service member threatens your life, if I would have known what I know now, that service member should have been discharged from the military, and they never were. So it's just not, not
I'd
really.
like to add, it doesn't have to be in-person trauma. Sexual harassment can include unwanted texts, unwanted social media contact, and so it can come in many forms.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, and thank you for sharing your experience as well, Danette.
I was just going to add one thing. And sometimes when people are sexually assaulted, they're impregnated, right? And that's going to lead to an issue with, can you stay in the military? Do you have to take a different job? You're not intending to have a child. And for many people I've met, that's changed their whole course of their career.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, Dr. Neavins.
So, military personnel and veterans we're fortunate to have folks like you all that want to help these survivors and victims, overcome what they've been through. But we understand that can last a lifetime. Can you talk a little bit about the long-term effects of military sexual trauma, and how if the healing process is, for some people it's a couple years, some people it's going to go for the rest of their life.
Yeah, absolutely. In my research, there's all kinds of challenges that people may face following experiencing military sexual trauma, from acute trauma response, immediately, to long-term PTSD and symptoms of depression, anxiety. Following those disorders, someone could develop an eating disorder or abuse substances, including alcohol. It can really have detrimental, lifelong effects.
And in terms of turning to alcohol or drugs, that's often a way to numb out and to avoid the symptoms, to stop the re-experiencing and the arousal symptoms, other things that happen. And about 2/3 of people who have experienced MST develop PTSD. So it's not everybody, certainly. And there are a lot of things. Sleep issues might happen, nightmares. There are great ways to get treated. And the first step is just asking for help and talking to someone that you trust that's going to believe you.
And I think it's also important, just like when someone is discharged after experiencing military sexual trauma, sometimes they get discharges that are not honorable. It could be general under honorable conditions and stuff. So we actually have people that have experienced MST that don't have honorable discharges. So now they're trying to get them overturned. And a large part of the people that have experienced it, they were either at a party, someone put something something in their drink or something like that, and then they go through just getting in trouble, Article 15s, one after the other, to eventually where they are discharged, and they're discharged on a medical, on a psych, on a general discharge, and so they don't get the same benefits coming out. So they have to go through a whole process, and that too can affect their livelihood.
And Dr. Neavins, you kind of briefly touched on PTSD versus military sexual trauma. I know before the show started, Danette, you were talking about the difference as well. Can we explain to our viewers what is the difference between PTSD and military sexual trauma, especially a lot of our veterans as they're applying for disability compensation and trying to understand how to navigate that? It often leads to confusion, and if they're denied a certain experience, they might be re-traumatized. So can we clarify a little bit of the difference between MST and PTSD for our viewers?
Well, I want to say that military sexual trauma is an experience. It is not a diagnosis. So as you know, with PTSD, there are 5 criterias. The first is criteria A, which is the activating event, and then there's symptoms that follow after that, whether it's hyperarousal, re-experiencing. So that is completely on its own. As I think we talked about earlier as well, is that when someone experiences MST, they may not have PTSD, they might have depression or anxiety, all sorts of other things that they may be struggling with because of the MST experience.
Yeah, I just want to bring up, because Joshua and I are county veteran service officers, we see these claims come across our desks very often. It kind of reminds me of like the Agent Orange. Folks come into the office, veterans come into the office, and they say, I'd like to file a claim for Agent Orange, right? So we have to have that discussion with our veterans and explaining to them that Agent Orange is something that you might have experienced or been exposed to in the military. But when we file your claim as county veteran service officers, we really want to know, how does your exposure to this affect you today? So that's how I like to think of the difference between MST and PTSD when it comes to filing a claim. I think it's really important to share with our viewers, so thanks for clarifying that, Danette.
I wanted to add one other point, that for the VA, you have to go through what's called compensation and pension. Mm-hmm. So you tell parts of your story. It doesn't have to be as detailed as it did in the past. And then a representative is going to make a decision about what percentage you get for service connection. Mm-hmm. Most people don't get 50%, 100% the first time they do that, and they have to appeal it. And I would really encourage people to hang in there, appeal it. And even if you don't get the percentage that you deserve, it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. Okay.
Absolutely.
Try to find a different person to work with next time, because they all are going to evaluate a little differently.
Absolutely. And it could be, going back to the person who's experiencing this, it could be where they're at, right? So we talked about how sometimes people wait 5, 10, 20, 30 years to come forward. The first time that you explain the experience to someone, you might not have remembered all the details, or you might not feel comfortable sharing all the details, or you might not fully understand the definition of military sexual trauma. And so you share what you have with the VA, and they're going to evaluate you based strictly on those details that were shared, how it was written up, right? Mm-hmm. But like Dr. Neavins is saying, it has nothing to do with, do we believe you? Do we not believe you? Did it happen? Did it not happen? So if you get that disability rating back, and if it's unfavorable in any way, or if it is lower than expected, as Dr. Neavins is encouraging folks, do not hesitate to come back and share additional details that might have come up, share additional therapy that you're going through with the VA, share additional ways that you're experiencing it in your life today. Talk to a different veteran service representative or claims representative. Get yourself to the point where you feel comfortable, and continue to try to get the rating that you deserve. That's something that we would always encourage folks for really any disability that you've experienced due to your military service.
So, Alena, you made me... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and my wish would be for active duty military members who have survived military sexual assault that they're able to stay in their career and stay in the military. So many are unjustly separated, but to be able to get treatment, I think the military owes the service members that and the opportunity to continue in their work.
Yeah, I agree, Dr. Donalson.
So on Veteran Voices, we've had World War II veterans, Vietnam veterans, and I just want to express how Elena and I hope I'm not speaking for you, but anyone who comes forward and seeks treatment and helps them, like you all, as far as you all are heroes too. You all are making the military a better place. You're making the world a better place. So I know a lot of people don't like to be called a hero. That's including war veterans, non-war veterans, and I hope that these men and women understand that they're doing good for the rest of the military and for anyone that's experienced this. I didn't want to get through the show without being able to say that, right? That's important.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. Dr. Donalson, I wanted to ask, we're talking about the military. I'll hold the question until we come back. At this point in the show, I wanted to show a little bit more of the interview that I had with an active duty military sexual trauma survivor. We did talk a little bit about the future and where we need to go from here.
I think that the way that you are sharing your story would encourage other people to do just that and share that story. And you described yourself why that's so important. I also want to say before we finish up here that, as a former NCO myself, knowing that there are women NCOs out there like you who are talking the talk, walking the walk, you're saying, look, this is important, this needs to change. I'm going to be the first one to put myself on the line, to put my physical safety on the line, to put my emotional safety on the line, to put my career on the line, to put my family on the line, and share these experiences and encourage others to do the same. I'm very grateful that there are NCOs like you that are still in the ranks. Is there anything else that you want to share with folks about your experience or your view on military sexual assault or what needs to change before we conclude the interview?
Actually, like, not only based on my experience, ma'am, and I'm actually glad that you did become a non-commissioned officer, and you do carry yourself very well as one as well too, and as a leader, and the reason why I say that, because you're actually trying to fight this fight, not just with me, but with our brothers and sisters in arms too, because there are males and females who experience it, whether they're gay, straight, or bisexual, and the unfortunate events that they had to go through. It makes MST survivors like you and I stronger. Like, excuse me again, who cares? Who cares of what they think if people are going to get mad at us? We just want to make sure that the future is brighter for the next generation that will serve. They don't have to go through what I've gone through, what you've been through, and what people are secretly fighting right now. Suicide happened because of things like that. People get put out of the military that are good service members because of situations like that. I would definitely think that they need to change the system to where it's less corrupt, less political, and that we definitely need to help, not just help each other out, but I want the politicians to come up with a better solution on removing investigations out of the green suiters' hands to where somebody, the outside party, can make the recommendation and not punish victims. I believe you all. If you all want to come forward, I will believe you. If you come to me, I will believe you. I've been there where I've been called a liar. Not everybody is lying about it.
So, Dr. Donalson, before that clip there, you talked about how your wish was that for people in the military to get the support that they need while they're in the military. And so I want to shift over and talk about this executive order that President Biden recently signed. We have a graphic on this. In this order, we're essentially taking the decisions on whether or not to prosecute for military sexual trauma and some other crimes. We're taking that out of the chain of command. Do you think that that's a step in the right direction to getting our military members the support they need while they're in?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is a tremendous and important step to have unbiased prosecution that is not involved in or already knows the military service members. I think to have an investigation in terms of finding out what happened and then prosecuting outside of the chain of command really is a step in the right direction. I think also in that independent review commission, adding standardized punishments for perpetrators across the board. So many times they can be a very small punishment of only 6 months to 10 years. And so having a standard punishment, I think, is another good step in the right direction.
And really quick, I just want to hear from Danette and as well, Dr. Neavins, is this a solution to the problem? Do you have feelings on this executive order yourself?
I think a concern for me when just, reviewing it was how, yes, it's separated from the command, but how does it get to that next level? Like, who's the one that decides, like, yes, this is something that we're going to move to the next level, bump it out of the command? And I'm wondering where does, that would be my biggest concern. Like, where does that happen and who's in charge of that piece right there?
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's not as removed from the military as I would like to see. And as you said, there are decision points. And so if that case doesn't go to that special committee, it gets dropped. So ideally, I'd like to see it completely out of the military and not a special personnel within the military. But I think it's better than chain of command. Certainly, it's a step in the right direction, tip of the iceberg, perhaps, because MST is an epidemic. And I don't think we always think about it like that, but it is. And we need to continue to throw everything we can at this issue to stop it and really hold the perpetrators accountable. Because if they don't stop, nothing will change.
So I agree, definitely it's a step in the right direction, but it sounds like in a perfect world, they would be reported to the local law enforcement and handled through there, if you were a civilian. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, because it takes the military out completely. If these numbers now are going to go higher, that's not a good look for the military. And we want to take that person who can decide if the military still has a good look, for lack of a better term, take them out. Ask the police department to investigate them. But I do think it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, Josh, I don't personally know what the solution is here, but I know that, in that interview, one of the things that was mentioned is, and I think the term used was the green suits, so it's a little bit vague, but I kind of took that term to mean even when you are establishing a special prosecutor or a special office, you're still doing that within the military. You're still, that person who is in charge of deciding whether or not something will be prosecuted is still wearing the green suit, right? They're still in uniform. So again, I don't want to put words into the mouth of this interviewee, but I kind of understood that to vaguely be the suggestion or the message there, that I think it was even mentioned that, and I would just ask, so what if you take it out of the hands of the chain of command, but the person that you put it into their hands to prosecute, they're still in the military? What if they know your executive officer? What if they know your platoon sergeant? Because maybe they went to basic training together, or maybe they're in the same MOS before they, transition into that. Yeah. So it's really hard to believe that there's going to be completely no bias. So the challenges, I think, are definitely still there. So, it sounds like we're kind of in agreement. We don't know exactly what the solution is to the problem. Is this at least a step in the right direction? Dr. Neavins, what do you think?
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to point out earlier is that traumatic memories are not like other memories. So we can say, this is what I had for dinner yesterday, and it's pretty linear. When you're traumatized, it's chaotic, and you're mainly thinking about, it's about senses. So what am I smelling at the time? It might be I smelled the person's cologne. I smelled smoke. I saw this. And then all those things can trigger you in the future. But then when someone recounts their story, it's all over the place. And it's very easy to think that they're making it up. This doesn't make any sense. You are missing parts, like you were saying, Elena. And that's normal. And you need someone who understands that when someone's relaying their story, because the perpetrator's often going to look a lot better because their story is linear. They've often made it up, and they've been very clear about what they're going to put in and not put into that story. It's devoid of the emotions.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I would agree in terms of, the memory loss when you experience something traumatic is real. I think that's another reason why people are waiting 10, 20, 30 years. It might have taken that long for something to be triggered into their memory. Danette, you talk a lot about the resources that are out there for our survivors. If you're able to talk directly to a survivor who's watching this show right now, what would you say to them in terms of resources and seeking help? What's out there for them?
Yeah, I would say definitely get help. Go to your nearest VA, register. Anything that is associated to the MST experience is free of charge. So counseling, groups, individual therapy, those sorts of things. Also, the Vet Center is a great outlet for resources as well. And vet centers were established because veterans did not trust the government coming out. So the VA has a different way of keeping medical records than the vet center does. We don't have access to the vet center's records, but the vet center does have access to the medical centers. So, and then sometimes you can get help at the vet centers. I know here in San Diego, vet centers see people with military sexual trauma and combat trauma. So it's a lot easier to get seen and faster that way than sometimes going through the local VA, because we do a lot of people.
The other thing is you don't necessarily have to go through the VA or the vet center. In almost every county in the nation, there's a center for intimate partner violence, sexual assault. Sometimes they're separate agencies. And some people prefer that to be away from the military life.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point to make for any resource as a veteran, right? There's veteran-specific resources. We very much want you to take advantage of those, and county veteran service officers are here to help you if you're facing any challenges in getting the resources and benefits you deserve. But don't discount the non-veteran resources that are out there that may also be able to help you, even if just initially, right? Because like Danette said, you might feel uncomfortable walking into that VA building, right? So walk into another type of building, walk into whatever building you feel comfortable so that you can get that help. And understand that it's a process, right? So you might not make it into the front door of the VA initially, but you might get there after a few sessions with a civilian therapist. You got to kind of find and navigate the solution that works for you and your experience.
Something we haven't talked about too much is prevention. If you three had an opportunity to speak with military generals, high-ranking personnel, like how do we prevent this from happening in higher numbers and make it more preventable? What would you all say to them?
Good question.
Education, training. The military is all about training, so this should be training, right? I don't know if it's happening.
Absolutely. I mean, I think shifting the culture in the military where military sexual trauma is permissive or not prosecuted would be a good start. From the report, what I appreciated is the advice to the commanders to really be the point of change here for the culture in the military by setting an example and praising good behavior and then quelling inappropriate behavior as soon as it occurs. So the seeds of sexual harassment and then sexual trauma don't grow, essentially.
Yeah, for me, I would say find someone in your life, your personal life, who's experienced sexual assault and talk with them. Have a very in-depth conversation, because a lot of this is a lack of understanding what it is. And people are like, oh yeah, it was just like some sex that got out of hand. That's not what this is at all. And if you talk to someone who's been there that you believe, you respect, I think it will go a lot farther for your daily work. And the military culture, as Dr. Donalson is saying, it's permissive. It's more than permissive. It's encouraging it with hazing and other things and blanket parties, and things are overlooked.
Yeah, I think that's such excellent advice in terms of talking with someone else who's experienced it. You know, a lot of times our veterans get out of the military. The first place they're going to go is to a college campus because they have that GI Bill. And I think college campuses are doing a lot to really help explain and define this issue. And so that might be a place where, you know, like Dr. Neavins said, you can get some of that non-veteran specific, but still very helpful support so that you can really understand and process your own experience. I know, you know, for most veterans, we don't process it while we're in it. When you're in uniform, you're not processing anything, you're just you're doing it, right? You're trying to survive and get the mission done. And so it takes sometimes taking that uniform off to really start processing that. And I say that just so in case anyone's watching this, if they're wondering like, is it weird that I'm just now starting to understand this, or I'm just now starting to you know, have these feelings come up? It's not weird at all. It's completely normal for you to have that experience now that you're out of uniform and you have some space in your life to process it. I do want to at least, you know, try to talk about and end on a positive note here. We talked about some of the resources. You know, if you want to throw out any others that you've thought of in the interim, that's great. But really, from our experts and from my fellow veterans who are guests here, what are your personal thoughts on can the post-traumatic stress that folks may be experiencing, can that be helped? Is there ways that can be addressed? What would you tell folks who are experiencing
I noticed in the chat too, Renee was talking about 5 years ago, things happening, and now it comes up for her now. That's a very common experience. And it often doesn't go away until you process some of it, maybe there's many different empirically based protocols you can do. So fancy word for saying research-based, and getting away from the avoidance. So helping your life become a little bit bigger. So if there's something that scares you, you're afraid to go to a movie. Okay, it's like going to a matinee, and then maybe you get to the 5 o'clock show, and then maybe you get to the 7 o'clock show. You have some support, but there are a lot of things that we can help with. There's a lot of hope out there, and it starts with telling someone you trust.
Yeah, absolutely. This is my work now as a psychologist, is to help people heal from trauma, military trauma, sexual trauma, all kinds of trauma. And there's so many really specialized interventions for people who've experienced these traumas, including EMDR. There's even psychedelic therapy now that's coming on board. There's a lot of opportunity to really overcome the symptoms of trauma that may be preventing you from living the life that you know that you could.
Yeah, and I just also want to just piggyback on all of that as also someone who works with MST survivors at the VA, facilitating groups. There are so many people that have had similar experiences. You are not alone, and just know that you're not alone, and you are to be. We believe you. So
I think that's an excellent note to end on, Danette. Thank you for that. This is going to conclude our discussion. We will have some resources at the end of the show to help veterans who are dealing with military sexual trauma. But first, we want to dedicate this show to Stephen Birchick. Stephen was the correspondent and associate producer for Veterans Voices. He was a Vietnam veteran. He was an author and a family man. I think I speak for Josh and myself when I say that he was our friend. He had a true passion for making the lives of veterans better, and he will be missed. In this clip, Stephen talks about his shadow box containing the one military award that meant the most to him.
Hi, I'm Steve Burchick. I'm a correspondent with Veterans Voices. And a couple of quick comments about shadow boxes. A shadow box does not have to be a large, complex project. You can make it as small or as big as you desire. It can be as simple as a single medal or award that has some special meaning for you. In my case, my shadow box is pretty simple. It's the Combat Infantry Badge. There's a quick shot of it. It's meaningful to me because it's the most important medal that I've been awarded by the Army for service in Vietnam. Most civilians assume that everybody in the Army is carrying a rifle and is engaged in active combat. The reality is that only 1 out of 9 or 10 actually are in live physical combat. For every man or woman carrying a rifle, there are 8 or 9 other people performing other backup jobs, such as transportation, supplying food, flying choppers, clerks at headquarters, cooks, etc. They're all doing a job that's important, but in my case, it was a special day when I received the Combat Infantry Badge. So, bottom line is, you can keep it as simple as a single award. Thank you.
We hope you have found our conversation educational. We leave you with some resources if you or someone you know is a military sexual trauma survivor. If you are looking for support with any veteran benefits, including those related to post-traumatic stress, a county veteran service officer is a great place to start. Find one near you at nacvso.org. The National Sexual Assault Hotline, or RAIN, lets you instantly talk with someone who understands. Call them at 800-656-HOPE 24 hours a day or visit rainn.org. Protect Our Defenders helps survivors of military sexual trauma with free legal services. Reach out to them at protectourdefenders.com. The Veteran Crisis Line is always available. Just dial 988, then press 1, or go to veterancrisisline.net. Veteran Voices is brought to you in part by contributions from the Diablo Valley Veterans Foundation, dedicated to helping veterans near you. American Legion Post 246, honoring the tradition of American Legion in Danville. If you'd like to help sponsor Veterans Voices, you can donate to Veterans Voices, care of Diablo Valley Veterans Foundation. Get in touch with them at diabloveterans.org. To rewatch tonight's episode, check back on our homepage later this week or check your cable provider's schedule to rebroadcast times. You can also rewatch this episode and many others on our YouTube channel, Veterans Voices of Contra Costa. So be sure to subscribe. Our next show will air on Monday, April 8th at 7 p.m. We will be talking about end-of-life plan for veterans. You won't want to miss it. To all of our veterans and families, thank you for serving. To all of those who tuned in tonight, thanks for watching and have a great evening.